Story 1. I dropped my favorite spatula on the kitchen floor. I heard exactly where it fell. I bent down to pick it up, but it wasn't there. I haven't seen it in 7 years. My cupboards and dishwasher go all the way to the floor, and there is nothing else for it to fall beneath. Story 2. I am a community support worker for the elderly. I arrived at a regular client's home and knocked. I heard her yell to come in, so I entered and sat on the couch waiting for her to come out. When she did not appear, I checked the bedroom and bathroom but did not find her. I then called my coordinator, who contacted the family. I later learned she had died in the hospital overnight. Story 3. I was in Tauranga, New Zealand at a place called McLaren Falls. My boyfriend and I went at night to see the glowworms. About halfway through the loop track, I experienced an intense and eerie sensation that something strange and dangerous was happening, almost like the presence of spirits or ghosts. I felt an immediate need to leave quickly. The night became quiet, with no bugs or birds. We hurried out of there. Later, I discovered that there have been many suicides and murders in that area. Story 4. Not my experience, but my aunt and uncle live in Japan, in what they call a very haunted elderly apartment complex. They claim that regular ghostly sightings are such a common occurrence that after the initial shock, they largely ignore it, such as seeing women with umbrellas walking at the corner of their vision at night. There are two elevators, a main one and a maintenance elevator. The maintenance elevator is said to be very haunted because it is used for moving bodies when someone has passed away, which is common as the tenants are mostly elderly. One night, my uncle was having a friend over, enjoying drinks and having a good time. When the friend left late, he drunkenly stumbled into the wrong elevator. He told my uncle that the elevator's lights would turn on and off and then suddenly accelerated up and down, not responding to any of the buttons he pressed. At that moment, my uncle's friend was so scared that he got on his knees, crying and apologizing for using the wrong elevator. At that moment, the lights turned back on and the doors opened. He had never run so fast home in his life. Story 5. We had a cat that used to stare at the same corner of the ceiling and meow strangely. We thought this cat was just being silly because he was a special boy. Sometime after he passed away, we got a new cat. And guess what? The new cat stares at the same corner of the ceiling and meows too. Story 6. When I was about 5 years old, I had a vision that I can't precisely define as I was too young. I remember playing and deciding to go into the room for my stuffed toy, which was lying by the window. I took it and turned around to leave the room when I saw an elderly woman in the doorway. She was terribly emaciated, almost like a skeleton covered in skin, with sunken eyes, staring at me. Her face resembled my grandmother's, except my grandmother was not so thin. She was wearing my grandmother's robe and had the same hairstyle. I was terrified, closed my eyes, and when I opened them, the old woman was gone. From that day forward, I told my parents and all my family and friends about this vision. Almost a year ago, my grandmother passed away from stomach cancer. She had been overweight all her life, but by the end, she lost a lot of weight and looked strikingly similar to the woman from my vision. Truly haunts me. I am not a native English speaker, so I'm unsure if vision is the correct word. Story 7. It was late at night while I was studying for work. I knew I was alone. I eventually heard the distinct sound of the back door to my house opening and then closing. I didn't think much of it, as my brother tends to come in and out sometimes to get food. Then, I sensed the familiar presence of my brother standing behind me. I smiled to myself because I know he likes to scare me sometimes. I glanced in the mirror next to me, and he wasn't there. I was a bit confused because I still felt his presence. I turned my attention back to my screen, and the next thing I knew, the bottom half of my body was paralyzed and tingling. I briefly saw dark, shadowy, slightly transparent hands reaching around to grab me. It only lasted about a third of a second before the hands were gone, and I was immediately shaking uncontrollably. I couldn't move my legs for about 20 minutes. I really don't like this memory. Story 8. My girlfriend died in an ATV accident, and unfortunately, I was there. Weeks later, I received a FaceTime call from her phone while I was in Walmart. My sister said I turned pale and looked spooked. I never answered the call, but I still think about it. It made me question if she had really died for a while. Story 9. I was babysitting at a family's house, and the mother told me that strange things have been happening. I had babysat for them for 4 years, so I had seen and heard my fair share of odd occurrences, but the creepiest was when I walked past the bathroom after putting the children to bed. In the mirror, I saw a blonde woman brushing her hair. I stood in front of the mirror, and I could see my reflection behind her. She continued brushing her hair and then faded from sight. I told the mother, and she said, "Oh yeah, that's normal. She's harmless. But don't go in the basement past a certain time because whatever is down there isn't harmless." Story 10. When I was home alone at night, I heard faint whispering coming from the basement. I mustered the courage to check, but no one was there. Just an old radio that had somehow turned on by itself. Story 11. Taking a phone call in my father's house a week after his death. His voice said my name twice in a questioning manner through a blizzard of white noise. Then the call ended. Story 12. I have shared this before in similar posts. In 1996, we lost my grandma. In the years prior, my uncle had visited with his cat. He lived about 4 hours away and came to visit occasionally. About 2 to 3 years before we lost her, my uncle was visiting, and my grandma went outside for a moment and came back in. What she didn't realize was that the cat had snuck out. When she realized it was gone, my uncle never found the cat, and for the next few years it made no appearances. My grandma felt awful. The night we had her casket viewing was difficult for everyone. Family came from all over, and afterward we went back to their house. My uncle arrived first, driving with my grandpa. Curled up on the front step was a cat. This cat. At that time in Canada, veterinarians would tattoo a number in cats' ears to identify them. He took the cat to the veterinarian the next day, and it was confirmed to be his cat. I'm sure some family must have taken him in for 3 years, believing they had lost him. It felt like my grandma was fixing a mistake and letting everyone know she was okay. It's not that the cat had sensed him. He had been back several times a year over the previous 3 years. The cat just showed up that night. Story 13. I woke up early one day, walked into the living room, and saw a grown man sitting in one of our chairs. I was about 8 or 9 years old at the time. I walked back to my room, terrified. I returned 30 minutes later, but he was gone. No one believes me. I am 19 now. Could have been my imagination, but I refuse to believe it was. Story 14. I wouldn't say it haunts me, but at the time, it filled me with dread. When I was in high school, my house had hardwood floors. For most of a year, around 11:30 at night, there would be the sound of a heavy cardboard box being pushed across the floor. There were between 5 and 7 distinct pushes or drags that would travel from a corner of my room to the door. It happened frequently enough that when I noticed it was getting close to 11:30, I would put my earphones in to avoid hearing it. Bonus event. I was visiting home a couple of years later and was sleeping in my sister's old room. I suddenly woke up, my chest buzzing as if someone had slapped it. There was no one there and no sounds. Story 15. I was looking at houses with my partner at the time. There was a beautiful chandelier in the living room. As we were heading upstairs, a bulb from the chandelier fell, narrowly missing my head and smashing on the floor. The owner apologized and said he had spare bulbs, no drama. We explored the upstairs and then returned to the living room. We found the owner staring at the chandelier while on a ladder, looking very confused. "Is everything okay?" he asked. "It's so strange. None of the bulbs are missing. I checked all 8 bulbs. They are all here. So where did that other one come from?" I felt a chill run up my spine. We quickly decided to leave. We chose not to buy before we even made it off the driveway. Story 16. I was a teenager, and I had a dream, more like a nightmare, when I saw my dad die. In the dream, it wasn't clear what caused his death. I just remember him dying and his eyes, and that I was there. I think I had this nightmare more than once because I can remember it clearly, but it lasted only about a year and then it stopped. Almost 30 years later, I had to live through it. I think I could stay calm and deal with authorities afterward because part of me had already experienced it. Story 17. One time, I was walking on my way to a wake. I am from the Philippines, so whenever someone dies here, the family always plans a wake at their house. The person who died was my elementary classmate's father, so I knew him personally quite well. The wake I was going to was a 5 to 10 minute walk from my house. When I reached the area where the streetlights were sparse and trees were scattered, I saw someone riding a bike. At first, I didn't think much of it, but as he got closer, I vaguely recognized his face. I wasn't sure if I was hallucinating, but I thought I saw the face of the deceased. I felt really scared at that moment. After he passed by, I continued walking slowly, and then he turned left. I ran to the spot where he had turned, but it led to a fence, leaving me confused about where he had gone. Story 18. My cousin was tragically raped and murdered. The shock was immense, and shortly afterward, I sadly miscarried. The following experience felt very real, even though I know it may sound made up. I do not claim it to be absolutely true because I am naturally skeptical. One night, I was awakened. Like an apparition, my cousin appeared, holding a baby. I could not see the baby's face. I asked her, "Who is that baby?" She replied, "He's yours. God said I can love him as if he is my own." The words did not feel like my own, but I responded, "He is yours now." With that, she smiled and left. I felt the spot on my bed where she had sat. It seemed so real. After this event, I was filled with a sense of peace for my dear cousin and my child. Story 19. I was about 8 years old and playing on the stairs in my house. I was pretending to be a lion because I was obsessed with the Lion King. The bottom of the stairs was the entrance to the house. There was a landing halfway up where the stairs turned and went in the opposite direction. There was a knock at my front door. I opened it and my dad was standing there. It was odd. Why would he knock on the front door of his own house? Not only that, he was wearing the formal version of his work uniform. My dad is a high-ranking police officer. He has a version of his uniform that he only wears for ceremonies. It has all his decorations and insignia. My dad doesn't even wear his regular uniform outside of work. He changes at work, let alone that formal version. He was just staring ahead with a blank expression and didn't speak to me. I spoke to him, but he ignored me. He walked right past and up the stairs. I followed him, but I took a bit longer because I was still pretending to be a lion. At the top of the stairs is another landing that leads to all the bedrooms. There was no way he could get back downstairs without passing me. I looked in all the rooms, and he wasn't in any of them. Then I went downstairs and into the living room. My dad was lying on the couch in civilian clothes watching TV. I asked why he ignored me and how he changed so fast and got back downstairs without me seeing him. He claimed not to know what I was talking about. I explained what had just happened, and he said he had been lying in that spot for the past 2 hours. My mom was in the kitchen, which you could see from the living room, and confirmed that he had been there the whole time. Story 20. My family and I lived in a house years ago that we believed was haunted. Several unusual things occurred during our time there. There was a rancid smell that lingered in the walkway area between the flats. We had a couple of inspections to try to find the source, but it was never discovered. My wife and I had a 32-inch television on top of drawers at the end of our bed. One morning, after waking up, we found the television on the floor, standing upright, as though it had been carefully lifted down and placed there, rather than having fallen. Neither my wife nor I sleepwalk. I sleep in one position all night and don't move. My wife says I'm like a log. She has a genetic condition that affects her strength and muscles, so she isn't capable of lifting a television that large, especially without making any noise. This made the situation quite creepy. One day, while we were all home in different rooms, I heard my own voice shout my wife's name from another room. She answered, and I informed her that it wasn't me. Our eldest daughter also heard it. We moved out of that house not long afterward, but we still discuss our experiences from time to time. Story 21. I recently retired but spent 35 years as an IT manager, 20 of which were at an insurance broker in Leeds, UK. The building, known as Broadway Hall, is a 200-year-old mansion that was formerly a doctor's house, now converted with numerous corridors and small offices. I often worked late due to the nature of my job. When the caretaker was off long-term due to illness, I was the closest employee with a company car, so I took on the responsibility of covering for him. This meant opening the building at 7 a.m. and locking it up after the cleaners left at 9 p.m. The cleaners often claimed it was haunted, with paper clips flying around and such, but I didn't believe in that unless I witnessed it myself. Being alone in the building after dark during winter never bothered me. I just set the alarm and locked the door. One winter night, while performing my duties on the third floor, I found it easiest to check if any office lights were left on by walking through the corridors with the corridor lights off. Any light from an office would be visible under the doors. I turned a corner, passed an open doorway to a small kitchen, and walked 20 feet to the end of the corridor. If the kitchen light had been on, I would have surely noticed it as I walked right past it just 2 feet away. Something compelled me to turn around, and to my surprise, the kitchen light was on. There was no chance I had missed it. I hadn't consumed any alcohol as I was driving. Quite stunned, I went back, switched off the light, and left the kitchen. To this day, I am convinced the kitchen light was off when I walked past, but I can't explain what happened. Other staff members refused to work on the top floor after hours. They were too spooked by the creaks of the old building. Anyway, I'm still skeptical, but I have no idea what occurred that night. Story 22. I don't know about haunts, but it has stuck with me. When I was a teenager, my dad's workmate died in a car accident. He received the call about it the following morning. I was awake in bed, playing on my Game Boy, and heard him get the call. That morning, it was cold enough in the house to see my breath. The first and last time it was ever that cold in the house. I will never forget the shock in his voice when he received that call. But I just saw him yesterday. Story 23. Coming back after midnight through the fields from a soccer game that turned into regular teenage hanging out. But without drinking, my friend and I were near an old shrine when a car appeared from behind. As they overtook us, they screamed something and pointed to the sky. We didn't think much about it at first, but then sparks fell on us, like from fireworks. It startled us a bit, but we reassured ourselves that the people in the car had probably lit some fireworks inside, which would explain the screaming. Then, when we reached our village and split up, another cascade of sparks fell on us. I have several more stories that I can't explain, but this one is the most bizarre for me. Story 24. My husband and I both saw the cat's reflection in the mirror enter the litter box before the actual cat did, and the same when she exited. We agreed it must have been a trick of light and never spoke of it again, but I know what I saw. Story 25. While at work one day, my wife called. This was unusual in itself, as she was a registered nurse working night shifts at the time. She told me that she had just experienced a terrible nightmare. Although she couldn't remember the details, it involved my friend Dave's family, and she insisted that I call him immediately to ensure his family was okay. My wife had a knack for sensing things, and I had experienced enough of this to know not to argue with her. So I called Dave, who was not working that day. He and his wife were raising his estranged son's children. When I reached out to Dave, he dutifully checked on the children and his wife, and everyone was fine. He asked me to thank my wife and assure her that they were safe. I called my wife back and relayed the news. She simply said, "No, something's wrong." I later found out that about half an hour after our conversation, Dave received a call informing him that his estranged son had hanged himself. His son had struggled with heroin addiction, which was the root cause of their estrangement and the reason Dave was raising his own grandchildren. However, he had cleaned up his life and was living with Dave's brother in Florida. He had been doing so well that the brother and his wife decided to take a vacation. While they were away, the son relapsed and, within 2 weeks, sold off everything in the house to buy heroin. On the day they were due back, he took his own life in shame. How my wife, whom I'm not sure has ever even met Dave, knew this, I will never understand. Story 26. I was about 9 or 10 years old. I had a pretty scary dream where I saw a lot of impaled heads at the end of my grandmother's garden. Before I could wake up properly, I heard the most horrifying woman's scream, piercingly loud. I opened my eyes but could not see anything, just a face. I shut my eyes as quickly as I could. When I opened them again, I was in my bedroom as usual. I climbed down from my bunk bed, and my CD player was open. The screen on my television was displaying a static channel, and all my neatly lined up model cars on the shelf were scattered on the floor. It was extremely hot, and I remember feeling really freaked out. It turned out that the old woman who lived across the road had died, and the ambulance was outside her house. My parents had gone over to help, leaving our house empty. I didn't sleep for about a week after that. Story 27. Late night stop at an ATM around 2:30 a.m. The bank only had an ATM inside the entrance. There was no drive-up option. I parked in front of the doors, and my friend hopped out to go in. Just as the doors almost closed, a guy literally popped out of the bushes and followed him inside. I did not like that. I had a rifle in the trunk, so I got out and opened it, just watching. Meanwhile, my friend sensed the situation and intentionally fumbled the pin, causing the machine to eat his card. He made a joke to the guy and walked out. We got in the car and left. About 30 minutes later, at a different bank roughly 3/4 of a mile down the road, a man shot and killed an older woman at the same type of ATM. Things could have been different. She could be alive. Well, it was 20 years ago, but it could have been natural. Story 28. I woke up one morning, and my parents' bedroom door was open. As I walked downstairs, I looked towards the door and saw a woman in their room. I walked back to double check, but she wasn't there. The woman had her back turned, was very thin, wore no clothes, and had short dark brown shoulder-length hair. I saw her, and it creeped me out. In another more recent incident, I used to work at a pub. We all sat outside before starting work very early in the morning, and my manager was telling me about the sound of high heels coming down the pathway. All of a sudden, everyone went quiet, heads turned, and the sound of high heels could be heard approaching the main door. I got up to look, genuinely thinking a customer had arrived, but nobody was there. Story 29. I was at my friend's house after visiting my dad, and I was upset because I found out he was still drinking. We were watching something in the living room when I went to the bathroom. The poster that was hanging fell, and the frame shattered. Then the shade covering the light bulb by the front door fell and shattered as well. I ran to the couch, and my friend's dad came out, asking what had happened. He cleaned it up, and I went to bed. Later, I received a text that my dad had gone into a coma. I saw a shadow in the kitchen and then got a call from my mom. My dad had died. Story 30. My former friend threatened me with a pipe wrench because a Nerf dart hit him in the head instead of soaring over it as intended. Several years later, he killed his mistress after she became pregnant. He did not want to have any living offspring. I have gone through some of my old Facebook posts where he threatened me with violence over what normal people would consider witty banter. The feeling of having escaped a potential murder is haunting. I keep him added on Steam and Facebook as a reminder of his situation, but he is restricted in every way should he get out alive and before he turns 60. Story 31. When I worked on a research vessel in the South China Sea, we were warned about the possibility of seeing black divers swimming nearby. We were essentially told to ignore them, do not look at them, acknowledge them, or speak to them. Just continue with our tasks and they would go away. I saw one about 10 yards from the vessel. I initially thought it was a seal until it raised its hand to wave at me. I almost waved back until I remembered we were meant to ignore these individuals, so I turned around and went back inside. It is worth noting that this area is about 100 kilometers south of Domsha Atoll, where no divers should be present. Story 32. My boyfriend, who had committed suicide the previous week, called me. I picked up, but there was no sound at all. Story 33. One night, I got up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. I saw someone standing in front of the large window at the front of the house. I thought it was my dad, but when I went back to bed, I could hear him snoring in his room. The silhouette was too large to be my mom or brother. It's safe to say I started sleeping with a bat after that. Story 34. I was at the bar wearing a t-shirt with a graphic of a name tag that said, "Hello, my name is Satan. An older lady grabbed me by the arm, looked me in the eyes, judged me, and said, "You're not him," almost as if it were a question. Story 35. My mom, sister, and I visited our grandparents' house for the summer. One night, my mom and grandparents decided to go out, leaving my sister, our dog, and me behind. As you enter the house, there are 3 rooms lined up on one side: the guest room, the brother's room, and my grandparents' room. Right beside their room is the kitchen at the end of the house. I was sitting on the floor with our dog, who was barely 2 to 3 months old, enjoying some ice cream. My sister had gone to the brother's room to take a shower. Out of nowhere, the puppy got up, walked into the guest room, and sat down, staring into the corner. The room was completely dark. I was scared, so I called him back. Just a few minutes later, I saw a figure cross the room where I was sitting and get into the kitchen. My heart sank. I called out for my sister multiple times, thinking it was her, but I got no response. After a few minutes, my sister walked in casually, and I was shocked. I told her everything I had just seen. She brushed it off, saying I was overthinking it. I tried to calm down. Then, 10 minutes later, she saw it too. She saw a figure standing in front of the dining table. At first, she thought it might be the maid's daughter. We both called out, but there was no response. Then it hit us. The main door had been locked from the outside before our family left. There was no way anyone else could have been inside the house. We then called our family and cried, begging them to come back home because of how scared we were. Story 36. My wife and I had a solid rose quartz ball, slightly smaller than a ping pong ball, in our living room inside a jar candle. One night, while we were in the bedroom, we suddenly heard a noise. The rose quartz rolled towards our bedroom and stopped in front of the door. Story 37. I left a ball game and saw the last breaths of a man overdosing. I felt a chill like I had never experienced before and truly believe it was his ghost. This lively spirit visits me in my dreams from time to time. The last time we were drinking beer together. Story 38. For context, I am male. I have long hair and am slightly bigger with a baby face. Before I grew my beard, many people mistook me for a woman. I was waiting at a bus stop that also served as a truck stop, which was great because it had booths, showers, if I needed them and had the money, and good Wi-Fi, food, and beverage options. I often had unusual layovers at this truck stop between 9 p.m. and 2 a.m. when my bus left. One time, a man sat down next to me that I didn't know. We started talking, and soon enough, he was offering to drive me in his own car to my destination, saying something about going the same way. I politely declined several times, using the fact that I had already bought my ticket as an excuse. I don't remember much about the rest of the conversation, except that he got up at one point and bought me one of those mini pizzas that gas stations sell. Every cell in my body screamed not to eat that pizza. We continued talking, with the occasional, "I could drive you," it would be no problem mentioned along with a few, "Your pizza is getting cold." Eventually, he did leave. Part of me felt bad for possibly being rude to an older man who was trying to be nice, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about him. Story 39. I canoe and camp. I love to be in the woods. A few years ago, we found a lake that was absolutely breathtaking. It was quite a portage to get into it, and the one out of it turned out to be even more difficult. The first night we spent on that lake, I was sitting by the fire with my friends and made a comment about how when I die in 50 years, I'd love to be left in the woods right there. Just one of those things that didn't mean much at the time. When we were getting the gear ready for the portage out, I found an urn tucked away next to a rock. Someone walked their loved one through at least one of those portages to leave them in what's genuinely one of the most beautiful places I've ever been. That we found it so soon after I expressed my wish has stuck with me for years now. Story 40. I dreamed that I was dying in a white space. I was either standing or lying down. It wasn't completely clear to me, but I was surrounded by white curtains hanging in a circular formation. Everything was really bright. Something happened that made me wake up suddenly. A loud voice or sound. When I awoke, I thought I saw a shadowy figure standing next to my bed with its hands stretched towards me. After a second or two, it disappeared. I was about 20 at the time, living alone in a one-bedroom apartment, and I clearly remember the shadowy figure being much darker compared to anything else in the room, like black mist in the shape of a humanoid. It was summer, so it wasn't dark outside, and I could see the room clearly even at night. I don't know what it was or where that kind of dream came from. It was so clear and vivid that I was terrified after waking up. The entire apartment felt cold, even in the summer, and hostile. Story 41. Cleaning out my grandfather's apartment with my mom. We had emptied the drawers of furniture that was going to the secondhand store. She asked if there was still any needle and thread in the sewing table, which had been full of miscellaneous needles and threads. I had already emptied it into the garbage. I opened the drawers to double-check, and all were empty. Mom asked me to pick up a needle, a dark blue thread, and a white thread. When I lifted the table to move it, a dark blue thread with a needle and a white thread with a needle fell out. We both looked at each other. It was definitely empty. Story 42. I didn't learn what it was until my adulthood, but I experienced a mimic in my home a couple of times. The first time, I woke up in the middle of the night to use the restroom and saw my father walk into my brother's bedroom through the closed door like a ghost. The odd thing is, the bathroom was closer to my dad's bedroom, and I could hear him snoring away in there. The second time, I was home alone with our family dog. I was at the family computer, and the dog was sitting next to me on the floor. The way the computer was set up, my back was to the rest of the house, and I had most of the lights off because I hadn't noticed how dark it had gotten outside. From behind me, I heard a voice quite like my own or my little brother's call out the dog's name. I froze. The dog looked up at me, and I looked down at him, but couldn't bring myself to turn around and look. We both just sat there until my dad and brother returned home. I had never been more relieved to see them. Story 43. My ex was out of town for about a week at a convention. We lived in a loft apartment, and I was upstairs watching TV. Suddenly, I heard my ex say my name from downstairs, as if she wanted me to respond. Our dog and cat ran upstairs quickly, clearly frightened. It sounded exactly like her. The same thing happened to my ex a couple of months earlier when I was out of town. She heard my voice calling for her. Story 44. Mum was tapped on the shoulder while sewing. She turned around to see what it was, and the cat was standing there with all its hair raised. I was also in her house when, without a breath of wind, the front door slammed shut. Story 45. I worked in a group home for juvenile delinquents that had previously been an orphanage and a mansion. During an overnight shift, I went down around 5 a.m. to make coffee for the morning staff. I entered the kitchen and it was ice cold. I could hear what sounded like children playing and a dog barking, but there was no one outside, and I was the only one awake. The noises stopped as soon as I left the kitchen. Another staff member who worked overnight shifts mentioned that he had also seen children running up and down the stairs leading to the kitchen. There were residents during my time there who, despite not knowing each other, reported hearing voices in one of the bedrooms. This phenomenon began after the woman who had grown up in the house before it became an orphanage passed away. Story 46. I have many occurrences happening in my house. Sometimes I hear people moving up or down the stairs, but when I look, no one is there. Occasionally, someone calls my name, yet I am the only one in the house. Last month, a heavy ball rolled off an even table onto the floor while I was looking in that direction. Once, a light downstairs turned on while I was alone. Story 47. One night, I was on a family trip to a different state. I have always had very vivid dreams, usually harmless and meaningless. That night, I dreamed I was lost in a neighborhood of identical houses and couldn't find my way out. Then my friend's mother walked down the street. She had never appeared in my dreams before. I didn't see her often and had not seen her recently since I was on my trip. She was pushing an empty stroller, holding hands with her youngest son, and crying silently. My friend, her older brother, and father were not present. The world felt lifeless except for me, the mother, the little brother, and those identical houses. She walked right past me, ignoring me entirely, and I started chasing after her, calling her name and asking for help to get out. No luck. I woke up the next morning and went to text my friend about the strange dream. I had a message on my phone that her father had passed away the night before. I kept the dream to myself until about a year later when I told my friend, and she said it actually brought her some peace to hear about it. I was surprised, as it freaked me out. Since then, she has been wary of my dreams and what they might mean. The whole situation just unsettled me. The death was sudden and unexpected, nothing leading up to it. I hadn't seen my friend's mother or younger brother in at least weeks, probably more like months. I hadn't been thinking about them before bed, as there was plenty of my own family drama on my mind, totally unrelated to them. So, the fact that I had this eerily specific, vivid, and memorable dream the same night something so traumatic happened to their family really messed with me for a while. Story 48. I was babysitting my niece when she was 4. She kept talking to someone named Sarah in the corner of her room. When I asked who Sarah was, she said, "The girl who lived here before. But she's sad because she can't find her mom. We were the first family to live in that newly built house." Story 49. Most schools are known to have haunted washrooms, and ours was no exception. However, I hadn't experienced anything to label it so. One day, my friend and I went to the washroom during class, and as soon as we stepped in, we heard someone moaning, almost like moaning Myrtle. I am unable to find the right verb to describe that sound. It had a descending frequency going from a higher to a lower pitch. At that point, the washroom was completely empty, as all the doors were swung open from what we could see, except for us standing at the entrance. We ran back to our class, but to this day I don't know what made that noise. I tried to blame it on machinery from some nearby roadwork, but the sound felt like it literally came from inside the washroom. Other people also reported similar experiences. Story 50. My partner and I once saw a swarm of unidentified aerial phenomena in the countryside of our small town. Once we were sufficiently startled, we returned to town, and one object broke away from the swarm and seemingly followed us for a while before disappearing or returning to the group. I will say this was close to a military base, but the way these objects multiplied and moved like insects around a light made us question if they were some kind of experimental aircraft. Overall, it was just strange and somewhat unsettling. Story 51. When I was younger, I was staying at my best friend's house, who died maybe a year later after being struck by lightning, believe it or not. He told me he was going to take a shower in his dad's bathroom, as we were the only ones in the house since his family had gone out to grab dinner for us all. I thought he had gone to shower, but when I turned the corner to look out of his room into the hallway, I saw a black figure standing there, halfway in the hallway and halfway behind the wall that met the living room. It just stood there, and I was convinced it was my friend messing with me in the low lighting. So I grabbed an inflatable mallet and pretended it was my penis, swinging it back and forth. It continued to stare, and I asked, "What are you doing?" I then put the mallet down and started walking toward it. That's when it slowly moved its body behind the wall and out of sight. I reached the end of the hallway, and it was gone. I freaked out. I pounded on my friend's dad's door, trying to get my friend, as I swore someone was in the house with us. He ran out and asked if I was okay. I wasn't. I knew what I saw. I told him quickly, and he ran to get his dad's gun. We fled the house. When his family came home, his dad searched the house thoroughly, like a secret agent, as he had served in the military. He checked everywhere, even under the house, and found no one. What I saw that day stuck with me, and I'll always remember my first-hand experience with shadow figures. I've never seen it since, but that day I know what I saw and where I saw it. It was a deep, dark hue of enveloping shadows. It was pitch black standing there, then moved away when I got closer. It was terrifying. I was 14 at the time. Story 52. I was around 15 or 16 years old. I am 42 now. In my bedroom, getting dressed, it was morning, maybe around 10 a.m., and I was home alone with my door open. I glanced into the hallway and saw a black dog staring at me. It had white eyes and appeared as a shadow against the wall. I screamed and buried my head in my bed, thinking that might make the bad things go away. When I looked again, it was gone. I was so terrified that my mom became worried about me, concerned I might not return to being a regular person. Even now, if I am in a room with a hallway outside and an open door, I fear seeing that dog again. Story 53. I had a girl staying with me and a girlfriend who did not live with me. One night, while lying in bed, I felt somebody crawling up on the bed. I figured it was one of them, but nobody was there. Story 54. In early summer 2020, I received calls from a private number around 1 a.m. Curiosity got the better of me and I answered. The caller used a stereotypical horror movie voice, and I couldn't determine if they were male or female. They said strange, inappropriate things and claimed they knew me and were outside my house. I had no idea who it was. Story 55. My sister and I were driving home after spending time together. It was midday, and the sky had a fiery hue, dim yet clear. I was approaching a bend, nearing a tall hill, when we noticed a bus driving towards us up the hill. It was moving in the right direction, but backwards, as if it were on a tow truck. We gasped. I pressed the gas pedal, we reached the top of the hill, and then, nothing. It was gone. I also work at a nursing home. One night, I saw a resident in a hospital gown walk into another resident's room. I rushed down there and found nothing. The older woman claimed there had been an old man in her room. I felt chills. Story 56. Driving through the UK's most haunted village, Pluckley, something just didn't feel right. Even while staying in the car, you could sense something unusual. I don't know what it was. I actually felt the need to lock the car doors. Story 57. I was almost asleep when everyone else was sleeping, so I got up to make a cup of hot chocolate around 11 p.m. After I made the hot chocolate, I put a spoon in the sink and turned around to walk back to my room. I had not even made it out of the kitchen when a little blonde girl with long curls and a white nightgown skipped out of the linen closet and out the front door. I was shocked and stunned. Years later, while setting up my dorm during my freshman year of college, I discovered that my hometown had been a battlefield during a war. Story 58. I was walking home from my cousin's house, which is on another block from mine. As I walked past three people, I noticed a young woman, a young man, and an older man who looked like he was in his 50s. I walked by them, and one of them said, "Oh, the house at my number has their lights out." That felt strange and unsettling to me. The other two didn't say anything. Weeks later, I saw them again and realized they were tenants who lived next door. I told my family about it, and now, whenever I leave the house, I turn on the lights if no one will be home because of people like them. At first, I didn't think much of it until I recognized who they were. Story 59. I was sitting in a motel room with the door closed, reading something on my laptop, and my mom had gone to work an hour ago. It was just me and my dog lying next to me on the bed when suddenly the door to my room started rattling violently. It was more than just a little doorknob jiggling. It felt like someone was trying to break in. This intense jiggling went on for about 2 minutes before it finally stopped. To this day, I have no idea what caused that jiggling. You have to understand, there was no noise prior to this incident. It was dead silent. I was minding my own business reading, and then came the jiggling. Couldn't have been an animal, so it had to be a person, right? But why weren't there any footsteps? This was a cheap motel, and the floor creaked when you walked. Even if someone tried to be sneaky, you would still hear the sound of footsteps, especially in silence. Furthermore, my mom had left for work, so the front door was locked. Plus, this was a motel during the day. They had people watching for intruders. About an hour after the noise stopped, I went into the front area that you must walk through to get to my bedroom, and everything looked the same. The door was still locked, and the door in question was a sliding door, which is difficult to lock and then go to the other side. These rooms had carpet, so you would have seen footprints or bits of dirt from shoes if someone had walked in. I just can't make sense of it because the most likely culprit, someone trying to break in, doesn't fit with the lack of physical evidence indicating that a person was there. If it had been motel staff, they would have just knocked on the front door, or I would have heard the sound of a cleaning cart. Story 60. I was on my way to a club, all dressed up, when a motorcycle rider going 80 miles per hour suddenly flew off his bike because a deer jumped out of the woods and slammed into him on the highway. I called the police, turned on my hazard lights, and did everything I could to help him. I have no idea where that man is now or if he is okay. Story 61. I was home alone getting ready to take a shower. I put my phone face up on the counter. I turned around to do something, then turned back, and the phone was face down on the floor. There was no noise or explanation. Story 62. This was years ago, right when the first smartphones became available. I met up with a friend to take the bus to the nearby city. Apparently, the bus stop we normally waited at was not being serviced that day. As it was getting dark, we started walking about 2 miles to the next bus stop, and he took out his phone to show off. I remember being focused on the small screen and its functions. Suddenly, it looked like someone turned off a really bright light, and our environment appeared much darker than a moment before. At first, we thought a car must have passed us, but we could see more than a mile behind and in front of us. There was no vehicle. Was it a street light that turned off? No. Did we pass a house with bright lights? Also no. We didn't give it much attention after that, but every time I pass that location, I remember it. There's probably a very logical explanation, but I feel there's a tiny chance that it's not. Story 63. I witnessed a man take a covert picture up a teenager's skirt from behind her back. It was at a concert, and I saw it from the main floor below through a glass barrier inside the venue outside of the concert doors while we were waiting to be let in. He did it while pretending to take a group photo. I told my friend, but she didn't want to get involved. If the girl or her boyfriend sees this, it was at a Lady Gaga concert in Arizona. The group, as far as I can remember, had 2 adult males, the girl, and a boy I assumed was her boyfriend. If an adult woman was with them, I don't remember it. She was wearing a mini skirt and was very thin. She could have been in her 20s, but I assumed they were teenagers. They appeared to be Caucasian. Their backs were to the glass, obviously. I've regretted not standing up to my friend and trying to alert the girl ever since. Story 64. This video of 2 men entering a haunted house in Appalachia scares me every time. Story 65. I was watching a video on my laptop about the top creepiest videos on the internet. I was getting tired, so I turned my laptop off and went to sleep. I woke up to my laptop still shut but somehow playing the video during a segment where a man is yelling in horror while being chased by a ghostly woman in a Serbian forest. I'm sure it was just my laptop acting up, but waking up to those screams and opening my laptop to view that video was horrific at the time. Story 66. I was 8 when this happened. I didn't know if it was the scary movies I had been watching for a couple of weeks or not. Everything was locked before we went to bed, and that is why I now have a big dog next to me when I sleep. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.